hurricanes, the droughts, the coral reefs are being bleached, the coastal erosion. You can go see all these things yourself. And the people here are certainly noticing it, and they want action. But also what we need from all of Mexican society is to recognize their role that their government is playing these next 2 weeks, which is that of the president of the summit. And so we need a responsible, transparent, open, democratic presidency of this summit, so that we don't have a repeat of the disaster that happened last year in Copenhagen, where the Prime Minister convened a very manipulative process that produced something that wasn't really created by all the countries. It was created by a handful of the biggest polluters, and didn't include a lot of the voices that needed, that the countries that are really going to be affected mostly by climate change. So we need people to know that this process is happening and that they can have an impact on it, and here's what they can do.
¿Dios es necesario para que salga adelante las negociaciones de la COP?
¿Cuál es necesario?
God, Dios.
¿El Dios es necesario?
Dios es necesario.
Yo creo que todos los espíritus del mundo, incluyendo la Madre Tierra, está necesario para tener sus fuerzas aquí, para guiar los gobiernos y los delegados en las negociaciones para tomar decisiones fuertes y justas.
Otra vez tu nombre y tu...
Es Víctor Menotti, de Foro Internacional sobre la Globalización de California.
Gracias. Muy bien.
This isn't something understood by most Americans, the way we think our president is, he won a Nobel Peace Prize and that he's making peace with the UN, but actually we're unwinding what are really the core environmental integrity components and the equity principles in the current convention. So that's really our big priority, is sort of damage control exercise, and keeping the U.S. from not taking its my way or the highway approach to the talks.
It seemed like that's what they're saying, though, at least listening to the opening press conference yesterday when he said we're going to have a balanced package, we're not going to move ahead on one issue here and there. Is that a bad sign?
Well, it depends what you mean. The United States version of a balanced package is merely operationalizing the elements of the Copenhagen Accord from last year, which doesn't get us the cuts or the commitments that we need in terms of emissions or providing finance and technology. So it's a collective suicide pact, the Copenhagen Accord.
Okay, what do you think Africa's position should be here?
There should be. Well, it should be in line with the science that says Africa will suffer more than anybody. If there's a 2 degrees average temperature for the globe, for Africa, it's 3 or 4 degrees Celsius. It's more, water scarcity and food insecurity. So Africa, I think many of the nations are calling for keeping temperatures under 1.5, where the U.S. is around 2. But many African countries are now talking about 1 degree. And they're talking about a scale of financial assistance that's way beyond what the U.S. is talking about. So I think many of the African countries have strong positions. Maybe one thing we're concerned about is the leadership of the African group at this moment with Ethiopia, because they are somewhat very under the influence of the U.S. and also Europe. And so we think African civil society and other governments need to really keep a close eye on that leadership.
Can I just ask one more thing? When you were talking about how right now the Copenhagen Accord is specifically rolling back things that we had already committed to, and can you give examples of that?
Example, just the environmental integrity of the current convention, which the first President Bush signed, commits all countries to avoiding dangerous climate change. And what the Copenhagen Accord does is explicitly fail to do that. All it is a collection of pledges, voluntary pledges, that don't add up to getting to where the science says we need to be, which is to keep it at a minimum under 2 degrees, but probably 1.5 or 1, and the Copenhagen Accord sends us on a track to 4 degrees.
So it's a step backward in terms of getting more specific in a bad direction.
It's going in the wrong direction and then not really going anywhere. And going in the opposite direction of environmental integrity and equity. The other big piece is the responsibility to developing countries that the developed countries have. We created most of the problems, so we have to help developing countries to do the transition, which costs more because we're telling them they can't use dirty fossil fuels. Nigeria now has to use clean energy, that's going to cost Nigeria more money. So who's going to pay for that? Who's responsible for that extra cost? Those who created the problem, like the United States. Also, there's technology. Where's that technology going to come from? Who owns the patents? Those things are going to cost more money. Also, the cost of adaptation. Maldives and other island nations are preparing to leave, to evacuate their countries. Who's going to pay for their adapting to a new way of life? All those costs are what's called the climate debt, and those are the outstanding obligations that the rich countries have.